Thanks so much, Sam. So I'm Dr. Jessica Gagnon.
I'm Arif Mahmood.
I'm the Sam for Changing Mindsets, and Arif is the Emma for Changing Mindsets.
I hope.
Changing Mindsets is another one of the projects like RARA that is funded under the same umbrella of addressing the attainment gaps. So there are 17 projects funded under that umbrella. And I also contribute to the RARA project as well. So it's really great to be able to be a part of today's event and to see, because we're not in competition, obviously these 17 projects all have the same goal. So we're actually in collaboration to work towards getting to that zero.
Okay, so we're going to go and begin the talk by talking about the perceptions versus reality. By showing some of the questions that have been asked to the British public through the Ipsos Mori poll and seeing how they may be different or skewed from facts and figures. Jess will try and then explain how and why these myths persist through the theory of the backfire effect and the just world theory. I'd like to then put it into context, the inequalities in education in universities for different populations. And then that's when the dragons will come out. We'll try and
demystify, some of the myths.
Yes, some of the myths. So the myths we'll be trying to demystify regarding degree subject choice, tariff and entry, type of qualification, low tariff students means high risk, and also who is biased. And then we'll try and finish off with some suggested strategies for institutions, practitioners alike. In our sessions for changing mindsets, we would have liked to do it today. We have an anonymous online doodle poll where we ask you some of the questions that they use for Ipsos Mori, and we're trying to engage what the audience think of them. We were conscious of the time, so that's why we didn't do it, but I would just like to speak through some of them. So the British public, I think 3,000 to 4,000 public members were asked about different things. One of them was teenage pregnancy. So what percentage of the population of girls under 16 are pregnant? The general public thought 15%. That's nearly 1 in 5. It's a lot. When actually the real figures show it's 0.6%. With regards to religion, again, they're asked what the population of Muslims were. The British public thought 24%. And again, in reality, it's actually 5%. Again, they were asked about Christianity, how much of the population was Christians. The British public thought it was 34%, when actually the figures show that was actually 59% in England and Wales. With regards to immigration, the British public thought that 31% of the population were immigrants, when the actual official figures were 13%. And even that's when that's taken into estimating and attempting to account for illegal immigration. And still, that was only 15%. So nearly double what the British public, or half of the British public thought. In regards to age, the British public thought that 36% of the population were 65 and over, when actually it was only 16%.
So I heard some laughs, because I think for the most part we're pretty critical in this room, that we have an audience of critical thinkers who do not believe that 1 in 5 girls are getting pregnant under the age of 16. Yes, some nods. So you understood the figures. Do you think you were thinking more along the lines of reality versus perception, right? So a lot of you were more thinking reality versus perception. But we do know that a lot of these myths about especially controversial topics persist, even in the face of evidence. And why might they persist? Who's already familiar with the backfire effect? No. So there's research shows again and again and again that when faced with evidence, people knuckle down. So we would like to believe that when a person's beliefs are challenged with facts and evidence, they incorporate that new knowledge and alter their opinions based on the evidence. We want to believe that because it sounds like the right thing that should happen. But research again and again consistently shows that when someone's deepest convictions are challenged by contradictory evidence, their beliefs in that misinformation gets stronger. It's possibly why we have a Trump presidency or Brexit. So the beliefs in something that someone is deeply convicted in, especially on controversial topics, only get stronger in the face of evidence and data. That's one problem. And another reason I'd like to suggest that myths persist around inequalities is the just world theory. Who's familiar with the just world theory? A few nods. So the belief in the just world theory, or also called just the just world theory or the just world fallacy, suggests that people generally desire to believe that the world is inherently just and that other people get what they deserve no matter how much evidence of injustice is presented to the contrary. We can see that when if someone reports a sexual assault and the first question is, what were you wearing, what were you drinking? We can see that when people's reactions to people living in poverty or living homeless is, do they have a drug problem, do they have a drinking problem? Trying to justify why they might be faced with this particular trauma or suffering. When people are faced with possible proof that the world is not inherently just, people are more likely to engage in victim blaming, ask those questions about what choices they made, as ways of coping without having to give up in their belief in the just world. People who benefit from the systemic inequalities believe they are deserving of those benefits, believe that their privileges are rightfully, justly earned, hard labor earned. I think we can see that in sometimes the quotes from lecturers we saw earlier where they said, I worked hard to get here. And not to diminish the hard work people do put in, but it's to talk about the fact that privilege plays a role. So, and conversely, they believe that those who are socially excluded, oppressed, or disadvantaged are equally deserving of their lot in life. They've made choices, and the gaps, for example, persist because of those students. It's where we get the deficit discourse, for example. Who's familiar with at least the deficit discourse? A lot more nods. So I want to suggest that both the backfire effect and the just world fallacy, the just world theory, play a role in why the myths around inequalities that students face in their experiences and outcomes persist.
Just to put it into context, and you may have seen these numbers before, some of the gaps, and this is across the UK institutions, home and EU BME students are 15% less likely to receive a first or a 2-1 compared to their home and EU white peers. And this still exists when we talk about one of the myths about when they come in with same tariff points. And we'll talk about this slightly later. Students from at least advantaged backgrounds are 14% less likely to receive a first or a 2-1 compared to students from more advantaged backgrounds. Black students are 50% more likely to withdraw from university in England than their white and Asian peers. And 8.8% of students from low socioeconomic backgrounds withdraw from university compared with less than 5% withdrawal rates among students from the most advantaged backgrounds. These are just some of the gaps that exist. I've actually written a blog for the project, and it talks about some other gaps, for example, the recruitment gaps, the employment gaps, the students going on to higher education, postgraduate studies, and also income gaps. So if you're interested, there's all the gaps, a lot of the gaps in one place at the same time.
All the terrible gaps, all the evidence you need in one convenient location. The first myth I want to talk about is one that was dispelled by Vicki Bolivar. Who's familiar with Vicki Bolivar's work? A couple of hands. So the work that she's been doing on Russell Group universities, the systemic racism and access to Russell Group universities that home BME students face. And so one of the myths that she's already dispelled but still seems to come up is that the subject choice that BME students, home BME students are making is not explaining the gaps in whether or not they access Russell Group universities. But that still comes up, even though this data came out years ago, this idea that, well, they're all choosing a particular degree subject and that's why they're not getting in. No, they're not getting in because of systemic racism. And her research has showed that even with their comparable white peers, the white students were significantly more likely to get into Russell groups, in particular Oxford and Cambridge. And of course, that's made headlines recently. We've at least seen those headlines for Oxford and Cambridge. Excellent. So this is the first myth we want to talk about, in part because I was hoping this was a gentle myth, sort of. It's not a myth that we've dispelled, but it's a myth that I feel like still comes up. And then the next myth is tariff on entry, which we have talked about earlier already, too.
Yeah, so another myth that persists is that the belief, the notion that BME students, working class students, are not doing as well because they're not coming with good A-levels results or good BTEC scores. One of the evaluation methods that we use for the Changing Mindsets project is we collected 5 years of pre-cohort data across the institutions that we're doing the project with, also at our institution. And the analysis, the preliminary analysis, shows that student outcomes by tariff and entry does not account for persistent attainment gaps within the schools and programs in cohort 1. This is consistent with findings from Mountford and Zimba, and we'd just like to show some of the university gaps. Yeah.
So this is University of Portsmouth data that was out of a report that came out before our project started. So this is not our project data, but it's looking at 3 years worth of graduate outcomes by each faculty. We have five faculties in our university. CCI is the Creative and Cultural Industries. It's where RARA is run. So this is the RARA project is trying to address this gap in particular. And if you can't see at the back, I can't step into the square. You can't see it at the back. The first box on the first item on the left is no tariff. But then we start to get to the tariff levels. So the students' A levels or their BTECs or whatever they've come in with. For the BME students in CCI who came in with the lowest tariff points, so that's that second point, they are 46% less likely to get a first or a 2-1 compared to their white peers, even though they came in with the same qualifications. And even when we move to the highest performing tariff points for our students, the BME students with the highest performance, our best A-level students, were still 20% less likely to get a first or a 2-1 in CCI than their white peers. So tariff on entry absolutely doesn't explain it. And we'll show you the other 4 faculties as well. So this is the faculty I sit in, humanities. Where there is a dot missing, we don't have enough BME students to have anything statistically significant to say. So that's a different problem of access. So we're not recruiting from either the lowest tariff point or the highest tariff point BME students in all of the faculty of humanities. Just so you know, this is multiple schools, this is not one school. And as you can see, the variation again across the tariff points. So what we should see, if there was fairness in this process, if systemic racism weren't playing a part, we should see the same likelihood of getting a first or a 2-1 regardless of the color of someone's skin. And I think we can all agree on that, yeah? It is different depending on the faculty we're looking at. So this is science. You can see at one tariff point, there's a switch. And it is a little more narrow than some of the others. We're working in science. We're also working Changing Mindsets in the Faculty of Business and Law. And we're working in the Faculty of Technology. It's a little bit more narrow in technology as well. But I think, what I want to ask you is, what does your university do with their data to look at this, for example? Has your university produced a similar report so you can see by the numbers in your faculty or in your school at the tariff point level what's really going on? Because this is one of the most persistent myths that no matter how many years worth of data we can say tariff on entry does not account for the attainment gap, it still rears its head when we present. So the other one I really want to talk about, and I'm pretty angry about. Who has seen this headline? A couple people have seen this headline. So the hand-wringing around grade inflation and the way that this was reported was students with the lowest A levels are rising in their ability to get a first or a 2-1, and we need to be worried, apparently, by that. This is a concern. We need a moral panic about it. Can we talk about the fact that at university, we're saying to students, come to us, we will educate you, we will help you develop and grow and be better, but don't expect to do any better than how you came in. If you came in with low tariff, you should expect to get a 3. And so the fact that this is coming out of Times Higher is nonsense. And so at the first point I want to make is we should confront this when this happens, either in our universities or in our publications, and say, we absolutely are here to help students who struggle at A level do better and get better over 3 years' time. And if we can't, what are we doing? If we can't promise to students that they can get better and do better and get a first, even if they struggled at A level, what is it we're doing? But more importantly, not just sort of on the sort of moral part of addressing this as a problem, the data doesn't always suggest that low A-level students will underperform. If you can see on this from the back, the BME students, for example, on the lowest tariff point are outperforming every other tariff point except for the highest tariff point over 3 years' time. So it's nonsense to expect that a student coming in who might have struggled at A levels won't have a chance to get a first or a 2-1. And in fact, we should expect that every student has the chance, if they put in the effort and we support them, and if we take away these inequalities and these barriers. So this is, I mean, I will get fiery about this because I'm pretty mad about it. But it's not the only one. So the next myth we want to talk about is the type of qualification on entry. So some of the headlines suggest that there's twice as many more BTech students or students with BTechs entering university. So there's been a lot of talk about BTech as a qualification and other non-A-level qualifications. Within our university, so as Lead University, we looked at qualification on entry for the 4 schools in which we're intervening with. So we are intervening with 4 schools. Within those schools, white students who entered with BTechs outperformed white students entering with A levels as far as their likelihood of getting a first or a 2-1. Okay? Does it surprise anybody? 3 out of 4 schools, white students who entered with BTechs were more likely to get a first or a 2-1 than white students who entered with A levels. But then if we look at the data more closely, in one participating intervention school at Portsmouth, looking at the 5 years worth of attainment data, so this is 5 years of graduate outcomes, it showed that white students who entered with BTechs were more likely to receive a good degree, 79%, 79.1% likely to receive a good degree, than white students with A level, 77.3%. It's not a huge number, but they were more likely. However, BME students with BTechs were significantly less likely to receive a good degree, 39%, compared with BME students with A levels, 51.9%, and white students with BTechs and white students with A levels. So I think I can say pretty confidently, although we need to do a lot more research, this is just our examples, that it's probably not the qualification, it's probably systemic racism. It's not the qualification if white students with BTechs are outperforming white students with A levels. We need to talk about it as a different problem. So, I feel like this is an easy answer, but how many of us in the room are committed to addressing systemic inequalities in university? I feel like we're all here for that reason, right? How many of us are comfortable admitting that we have implicit biases? That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I feel like we are preaching a bit to the choir. One of the things that I think is good about some of our initial findings in the Changing Mindsets project is that out of the 1,100 plus students who took the survey and 200 and something staff that took the survey, our report's coming out soon, so you can see the numbers soon. The majority of both staff and students are committed to speaking out against hate, committed to creating inclusion, working towards creating inclusion. So, and a majority of our staff and students, by the scales we used in our survey, have growth mindsets. And what we found was that those who did the survey who had a growth mindset were also more likely to be committed to working towards inclusion and overcoming bias. And those that had fixed mindsets were more likely to have stereotypical beliefs. But while the majority of our staff and students indicated they would speak out against hate and that they were committed to working towards inclusion, they also admitted to stereotypical thinking, unintentional stereotypical thinking. So almost every one of our staff and students who took the survey admitted to some level of unintentional stereotypical thinking. So implicit bias plays a big role in the way that we make decisions, in the way that we see the world, in the way that we interact with each other, with our students, or how our students interact with us. So some of the initial findings, some of the initial strategies and suggestions we have out of Changing Mindsets, and like rah-rah, we're only a year in, so give us some time, we'll have more. The first is that university strategies need to address inequalities through multifaceted means. So, for example, there seems to be, at least at the university leadership level, this desire for projects like the rah-rah project and the Changing Mindset project to be the magic pill that's going to fix everything. And that's just not going to happen. With systemic ingrained inequalities, there's no way that one program, one thing is going to fix it all. If that were true, it would already have been done. And so we're talking about embedding research-informed evaluative approach, talking about strategies that are geared towards institutional culture changes so that we can have the possibility of real lasting change. And one of our partner universities has done this by setting a KPI, key performance indicator at the university level of reducing their gap to 0 by 2022, the University of the Arts London. Any other institutions here represented have a 0% on paper published gap goal? No. Is that a problem, right? We can agree that's a problem. The goal should be 0%. And we're all going to sign up to the pledge anyways, but the goal should be 0%. There should be no gap. And the goal should always be 0%. And if universities are committed to it, they should be able to put it down on paper and give it a timeline. A soon timeline, not like 10, 20 years from now. We're also suggesting university strategies for tackling attainment gaps should include myth-busting like this. Because what happens when Arif and I present often is that we get a lot of anecdotes from staff who want to tell us why it's not a systemic issue, it's the student issue, who want to do that deficit discourse stuff around students. Oh, one of them says to me, I had a student with a strong accent, so I think that's why he struggled. Thank you for laughing or getting upset about that, because that's nonsense. But that comes up. So it's like, yep, nope, don't have to think about it. Just world theory, backfire effect. It's not my problem. The student has an accent. Universities should develop strategies for tackling the attainment gap using learner analytics. So one of the things that we're able to say about the data from our project, because we're looking at 5 years worth of data, is something more focused in the data rather than surface level data. And I think a lot of universities aren't using their data. Students are giving them their data, but aren't using their data to better the student experience and to improve student outcomes. They collect the data a lot, we know that. What are we doing with that data to make sure that we're addressing inequalities? So I think there should be more and more a push towards learner analytics to better understand how we can target our efforts towards decreasing the gap. So for example, in one of the schools that we're intervening with at Portsmouth, their BME attainment gap over 5 years is 3.4%, 3.2%. It's 3-something%. It's low. It's still unacceptable. 0 is the only acceptable number. But one of our other schools we're intervening with is almost 33% over 5 years. And so when I say we should use learner analytics to do better, we should know why it is that those two schools are so wildly different. And can we do better? Can we see why one school is lower and make sure that that 3% becomes 0%, but also take that example to that 33% and really address the issue. Given the potential for variation, that's kind of what I came to, the variation for attainment gap strategies, university strategies need to be tailored. So like I said, if we understand that some schools are doing much worse than others or much better than others, what is it we're doing to find out why that is and try to replicate? One thing I can say across our five partner universities is that working class students, low income students are faring very well. So they're not doing statistically any, overall, not doing statistically any worse than their peers from more advantaged backgrounds. That's not true necessarily at every school level, but for the most part, all 5 schools, students who come in who are from low-income families are doing much better than the national average. And for us, like I said, since our finding indicates that staff and students are likely to want to work, I mean, most of our staff and students want to actively work towards creating inclusion. Universities really need to provide opportunities for staff and students to work in partnerships to address inequalities. So and I want to echo Camille saying it needs to be with students, not for them or about them. And we do have references that you can go to on the website or use the QR code. It's a lot of them, though, just so you know. It's both our cited references and all the references we've used over the year for Changing Mindsets. So it's a few pages, but still. And that is us.